The devil's footprints. The night the snowstorm broke, I could almost feel the village exhale, a collective sigh of relief after hours of howling winds and rattling windows. Black Hollow had always been a place of quiet winters, a sort of sleepy hamlet where the snow muffled every sound, blanketing the world in an unnatural hush. But tonight, the silence was oppressive, more a suffocating weight than a tranquil lull. I remember locking the bookstore's heavy wooden door with shaking fingers, the key stiff in the frozen lock. My shift had dragged on far too long, the hours filled with an eerie absence of customers. The streets outside had been empty all day, and yet somehow I'd felt watched. Every so often I'd glance up from my work, certain I'd caught movement in my peripheral vision. But each time, the frosted windows reflected only the lamplight and the swirling snow. By the time I stepped outside, the snow had ceased falling. The storm had left behind a world of stark white and deep shadows, the pale light of a crescent moon casting the village in a ghostly glow. My boots crunched against the snow as I headed down the main road, a sound too loud in the eerie stillness. It wasn't long before I saw them. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, an illusion cast by the interplay of moonlight and shadows. But as I got closer, I realized there was no mistaking it. Hoof-like marks in the snow, perfectly spaced, impossibly precise, ran down the center of the street. I paused, staring at them, a prickle of unease creeping up my spine. The snow was pristine, untouched except for these tracks. They weren't the wide, uneven prints left by horses trudging through deep drifts. These were narrow, sharp, and impossibly deep, as though a heavy weight had pressed them into the ground. And they were fresh. The storm had ended less than an hour ago. No one had been out. I would have heard them. My first instinct was to turn around, to head back to the bookstore and wait until morning. But something in the pattern of those tracks held me fast. There was a rhythm to them, a strange, deliberate precision that felt wrong. Against my better judgment, I followed them. The farther I went, the stranger the village seemed. Black Hollow was a place I knew intimately. Yet that night, under the cover of snow and moonlight, it felt foreign. The houses, their windows dark and lifeless, loomed over me like silent sentinels. The lampposts, which should have cast warm halos of light, seemed dim, their glow weak and sickly. As I walked, the tracks led me away from the main road and onto the narrow path that wound through the woods on the village's edge. I hesitated at the tree line. By then, every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn back. But logic had little sway over the pull I felt, a compulsion I couldn't explain. The trees rose like skeletal hands against the night sky, their snow-laden branches bending low as if to shield me, or trap me. The tracks were more distinct here, standing out starkly against the untouched snow. I followed them deeper into the woods, the cold air biting at my face and numbing my fingers despite my gloves. That was when the silence began to change. At first it was subtle, a faint rustling, so soft I thought it might be the wind stirring the branches. But the trees were still, their shadows unmoving. The sound grew, shifting into something more insidious. It was a murmur, low and indistinct, as though countless voices were whispering just out of earshot. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding. The air around me felt charged, electric, and I realized I was holding my breath. For a long moment I stood frozen, straining to make sense of the sound. But no matter how hard I listened, I couldn't make out the words. It felt like the forest was speaking to me. The tracks continued ahead, winding deeper into the woods. Against all reason, I pressed on, my unease mounting with every step. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. They didn't come from any one direction. They were everywhere, surrounding me, pressing against me like unseen hands. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to change. The trees, once familiar, now looked warped, their trunks twisted and gnarled. The snow beneath my feet felt wrong, too soft and yielding, as though it would swallow me whole if I lingered too long in one place. Then I noticed my own footsteps. I'd been so focused on the hoofprints that I hadn't realized. My own tracks were missing. I glanced behind me, expecting to see the familiar trail of boot prints, but there was nothing. The snow was pristine, untouched, as though I had never been there. Panic flared in my chest. I spun around, my breath coming in quick, visible bursts, but there was no one else. Just the trees, the snow, and the whispers. And then I saw it. Up ahead, the hoofprints stopped abruptly at the edge of a clearing. My pulse quickened as I approached, the whispers now a cacophony in my ears. The clearing was bathed in an otherworldly light, the snow reflecting the pale glow of the moon. At its center stood a stone altar, weathered and cracked with age. It was half buried in the snow, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift under my gaze. The air around it felt heavy, charged with a tangible energy that made my skin crawl. I stepped into the clearing, my legs moving as if of their own accord. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the altar itself. On its surface lay an old book, its cover dark and worn, the leather cracked and peeling. Beside it was a piece of parchment, yellowed and brittle with age. My hands trembled as I picked up the parchment. The words scrawled across it sent a chill down my spine. "Follow the path, and you will meet the devil himself." The hum grew louder, vibrating through my skull, and I staggered back, dropping the parchment. The clearing seemed to close in around me, the trees bending low, their branches clawing at the sky. I wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of the village, but the hoofprints surrounded me now, encircling the clearing like a trap. There was no way out, and somewhere, just beyond the trees, something was watching. The clearing closed in around me like a vice, the trees looming taller, their gnarled branches twisting into claw-like forms. The whispers returned, rising and falling in a dissonant chorus, weaving themselves into the deep hum emanating from the altar. My breath came in ragged gasps, the icy air burning my lungs, but I couldn't stop staring at the book. The hoofprints, once a trail, were now a boundary, circling the clearing with terrifying precision. My heart pounded as I realized there was no breaking through them. It was as if the snow had hardened to stone wherever the prints lay, forming a perfect, unyielding ring. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from the empty woods, but something told me that whatever lurked beyond the trees already knew my thoughts. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, not by a single presence, but by many. Countless eyes hidden in the shadows, each one boring into me with an intensity that made my stomach churn. The book on the altar called to me, its leather cover glistening with an unnatural sheen. The runes etched into its surface glowed faintly, pulsating in rhythm with the hum. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I stepped forward. My boots crunched softly against the snow, the sound swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. When I reached the altar, the whispers shifted, their tones deeper, more guttural, like a language not meant for human ears. My hands trembled as I lifted the book. It was heavier than I expected, its weight pressing down on me as if I were holding something alive. The moment I opened it, the air seemed to shatter. A deafening roar exploded from the woods, shaking the ground and sending a cascade of snow tumbling from the branches. The hoofprints flared with a fiery glow, their edges sharp and molten. The temperature plummeted, and my breath crystallized in the air before freezing solid and falling to the ground like shards of glass. The book's pages were filled with symbols and drawings, each one more grotesque than the last. They seemed to writhe on the paper, twisting and shifting as if alive. My eyes landed on a page near the center, where a crude sketch depicted a figure with the body of a man and the legs of a beast, its head adorned with jagged horns. Beneath it, in jagged English, were the words, "He walks where the snow is pure. He waits where the light does not reach." The whispers reached a fever pitch, the voices overlapping until they were nothing but a deafening cacophony. I slammed the book shut, but it was too late. The ground beneath me trembled, and a shape began to emerge from the darkness. A figure stepped into the clearing, its movements unnaturally smooth, as though it were gliding rather than walking. At first, I thought it was a man, but as it drew closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Its legs were those of a beast, ending in massive, cloven hooves that seared the snow with each step. The air around it shimmered with heat, the frost melting in its wake. Its torso was humanoid but grotesque, the flesh stretched taut over a skeletal frame that seemed too large, too angular. Its face was a mask of nightmares, a twisted amalgamation of animal and man. Deep-set eyes glowed with a hellish light, and its mouth curled into a smile that revealed jagged teeth. From its temples sprouted horns that twisted like ancient roots, their surfaces blackened and cracked as though burned. It stopped at the edge of the circle, its fiery gaze fixed on me. The whispers fell silent. The only sound was the steady crunch-crunch of the snow beneath the creature's hooves as it paced the perimeter of the circle, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. I clutched the book to my chest, its presence somehow grounding me, though the runes on its cover burned hot against my skin. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, but my body refused to move. "You came," it said at last, its voice a deep, resonant growl that echoed in my chest. It wasn't a question. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. "You followed the path," it continued, tilting its head in mock curiosity. "Do you understand what that means?" I shook my head, unable to tear my gaze away from its glowing eyes. "It means you have trespassed into my domain." The creature leaned forward, its towering form casting a shadow that swallowed me whole. "And now, you must choose. Choose." My voice was barely a whisper, my throat dry and raw. It grinned, a grotesque stretch of its mouth that revealed far too many teeth. "I offer you what every mortal craves. Power, wealth, knowledge, all of it, yours, in exchange for one simple thing." I didn't need to ask. The answer was written in the air, in the sulfurous stench that clung to the clearing, in the oppressive weight of the creature's presence. My soul. I shook my head violently. "No, I didn't come here for this. I didn't even know." But ignorance is no excuse," it interrupted, its voice smooth, almost amused. "The path was yours to take, and you walked it willingly." I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I just want to go home." The creature's grin widened. "There is no home to return to. Not until you make your choice." Desperation clawed at me. My eyes darted to the book, its runes glowing brighter with each passing moment. Somewhere in its pages, I was certain, lay a way to banish this thing, to undo whatever curse had brought it here. The creature seemed to sense my thoughts. Its expression darkened, the fiery glow of its eyes intensifying. "Foolish," it hissed, its voice no longer amused. "Do you think you can defy me?" The ground trembled as it stepped closer, the circle of hoofprints flaring with fire. I flipped the book open, my hands shaking so badly the pages blurred before my eyes. The symbols seemed to rearrange themselves, shifting and twisting until they formed words in a language I couldn't comprehend. The whispers returned, guiding me, urging me to read aloud. The creature roared, its voice shaking the clearing. But I forced myself to speak, the foreign words tumbling from my lips. The air grew impossibly cold, the fire in the hoofprints flickering and dimming. The creature staggered, its form flickering like a dying flame. It lunged for me, its claws outstretched. But I kept chanting, the words pouring from me in a desperate stream. The final word left my lips, and the clearing erupted in light. The creature let out a bone-chilling scream as its form disintegrated, collapsing into ash and shadow. When the light faded, I was alone. The hoofprints were gone, the altar reduced to a pile of crumbled stone. The book lay in the snow, its cover blackened and smoking. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, the forest blurring around me as I fled back to the village. But even as I reached the safety of my home, I knew it wasn't over. The whispers still lingered, faint but insistent. And when I looked out my window that night, I saw them, hoof prints leading away into the woods, waiting for me to follow. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's fiery gaze, its skeletal frame, the terrible smile that promised no escape. The hoof prints outside my window haunted me, their sharp, deliberate pattern burned into my mind. I tried to convince myself it was over. The book was gone, the altar destroyed, the creature vanquished. But the silence in my house felt wrong, too heavy, as if the air itself had thickened. The faintest sound, wind rattling the shutters, the creak of the floorboards, made me jump. The whispers weren't gone. They had simply grown quieter, like predators waiting for their moment. By dawn, a fresh layer of snow blanketed Black Hollow. I hoped it would cover the hoof prints, but when I opened the curtains, they were still there, perfectly preserved, cutting through the snow like a wound. I told myself not to follow them. Whatever waited at the end of that path wasn't something I could face again. But even as I resolved to stay inside, I felt the pull, subtle at first, like a nagging thought, then stronger, almost physical. The whispers returned, soft but insistent, coaxing me toward the door. I tried to ignore them, but they burrowed into my mind, growing louder, more urgent, till the sound was unbearable. Covering my ears did nothing. They were inside me, gnawing at my resolve. I stepped outside. The air was colder than it had any right to be, a biting chill that cut straight to the bone. The hoof prints stretched ahead, leading not to the woods but toward the outskirts of the village, where the land dropped off into a vast frozen marsh. I followed them. Each step felt heavier, the snow clinging to my boots like lead. The whispers guided me, their tone shifting from urgency to something darker, more menacing. The village faded behind me, its comforting light swallowed by the ever-thickening fog. The marsh loomed ahead, an expanse of white and gray, its surface broken only by the skeletal remains of dead trees jutting from the ice. The hoof prints led straight to its center, where a blackened shape protruded from the snow, a spire jagged and unnatural, like an obsidian tooth rising from the earth. As I approached, the whispers rose to a crescendo, forming words I could finally understand. He is waiting. I stopped at the edge of the spire, my breath freezing in the air. The hoof prints ended abruptly, their final mark burned into the ground at its base. The spire pulsed faintly as though alive, its surface slick and cold. The ground trembled. From the fog emerged the figure I'd hoped never to see again. The devil. Its horns gleamed in the dim light, its eyes burning brighter than before. It smiled at me, that same horrible grin that spoke of endless torment. "You thought you could banish me," it said, its voice a low rumble that reverberated through the marsh. "But I'm not so easily undone." I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to run. The marsh stretched endlessly, the village a distant memory. "This is not your world," I managed to say, but my voice wavered. "You don't belong here." It laughed, a sound that sent a shiver through the frozen air. "This place has always been mine. You were merely foolish enough to see it." The spire pulsed again, brighter this time, and I realized too late that it was not a monument but a gateway. Its surface cracked and split, spilling a darkness that devoured the light. Shapes moved within it, shadowy forms that writhed and clawed, eager to escape. The whispers became screams, deafening and all-encompassing. My mind felt as though it would split apart. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. The devil stepped closer, its hooves searing the ground, the heat rolling off its body in waves. "You could have walked away," it said, its voice almost pitying. "But now you are mine." I looked up, and for a brief moment I thought I saw something human in its eyes. A flicker of sorrow, perhaps, or regret. Then it was gone, replaced by unrelenting malice. The spire exploded in a burst of black fire, and the world fell away. I woke in my bed, drenched in sweat, the whispers gone. Morning light streamed through the window, and for a fleeting moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the hoof prints, trailing from the edge of my bed to the door. They were fresh, and this time they led deeper into the house, or